A man who swore an oath to protect, a neighborhood waking to terror, a criminal who vanished into the night only to be remembered for decades. This is the story of a predator who wore a badge by day, prowled the suburbs by night, and left families broken in his wake. Please help this channel grow, like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. It begins with a window left unlocked, a light off in the hallway, a bicycle's faint creak, and ends with a life whose ordinary order is ripped apart forever. The name the press gave him changed over the years. East Area Ransacker, East Area Rapist. Original Night Stalker, but the terror was the same. For more than a decade he stalked California, then vanished until DNA and a new kind of detective work finally unmasked a suspect. The man, Joseph DeAngelo. To understand how the nightmare unfolded, we need to go back to the 1970s to ordinary streets, ordinary houses, ordinary lives. It started as burglaries, homes entered in the dark, items disturbed, small things taken. But the crimes escalated and a pattern began to emerge. Investigators eventually traced a string of incidents across multiple counties in California. The man who committed them moved through neighborhoods like a shadow. In some places he appeared as a burglar who took trinkets. In others he returned as a predator who attacked sleeping families. It was confusing at first. Multiple monikers were used by law enforcement and the press because the crimes occurred across jurisdictions and seemed, at times, to be disconnected. Among the earliest names attached to these acts was the East Area Ransacker, a thief who rifled through homes, stealing small items, sometimes leaving messages or marking the locations he targeted. Later, as attacks shifted to sexual assaults, the label East Area Rapist stuck to incidents concentrated in the eastern suburbs of Sacramento. And when investigators realized a pattern tied the rapes to later murders in Southern California, the term Original Night Stalker came into use. Over time, investigators would piece together these threads and recognize they all pointed to one perpetrator. Many victims were women assaulted in their own homes while their partners or families slept nearby. The cases spanned counties and decades. The number of known victims grew as cold cases were re-examined and linked. Investigators estimated dozens of rapes and at least a dozen murders were connected to one man. A chilling tally that would haunt communities across the state. The attacks often followed a similar pattern. Late at night, a home entered through an unlocked window or door, the intruder's shadow moving through dim rooms. The sudden awareness of a presence at the bedside, couples awoke to find an intruder pointing a flashlight, or a woman alone confronted in bed. He tied victims, controlled their movements, and, in the worst cases, he murdered. He was methodical and controlled. In many break-ins where couples were present, he restrained the man, often tying him and humiliating him in cruel ways while he isolated the woman. Survivors later described a calm, confident voice, a man who knew how to move silently, who knew where to look in a house. He sometimes took small souvenirs, coins, jewelry, objects that connected him, in his mind, to the events. Those trophies would later help link crime scenes together. The violence escalated. Where some attacks ended in assault, others turned into murder. Couples were found killed in their beds. In the wake of those murders, entire neighborhoods felt the shift. The instinct that kept people safe, the ordinary trust of a suburban night had been shattered. Names matter. These were mothers, fathers, teenagers, entire families whose lives ended in a single night. Their stories sometimes became statistical lines in a file, but for those left behind, they were every memory, every ritual, every future stolen. Survivors carried the trauma for decades. From the first burglaries to the linked rapes and murders, the investigation was a patchwork of local police agencies, frustrated detectives, and thousands of tips that went nowhere. Multiple jurisdictions complicated the investigation. Evidence sat in storage, waiting for better tools and sharper connections. In the 1970s and 1980s, forensic science had limits. DNA technology did not yet exist in the way it would later transform cold cases. Investigators relied on fingerprints, eyewitness descriptions, handwriting analysis, and crude composite sketches. They worked tirelessly, but the suspect was careful, changing tactics and crossing county lines to confuse patterns. A case that became famously cold. Decades passed. New detectives took old files from boxes. Amateur sleuths and true crime writers kept public attention alive. One important public voice, a writer who poured time and energy into the case, helped refill the spotlight and reminded a distracted public that those files represented people. That sustained attention mattered. It meant the crimes were never fully forgotten. Then came a new tool: investigative genetic genealogy. Scientists, detectives, and DNA analysts began to combine DNA from crime scenes with family tree research built using consumer genealogy databases. It was a method decades in the making, using the public's voluntary DNA profiles to trace relatives and reconstruct a suspect's family tree. That innovation would change the course of the East Area Rapist hunt. By 2018, investigators had developed a genetic profile from old crime scene evidence and uploaded it to genealogy databases available to law enforcement. That profile matched distant relatives who had used those services. From those partial matches, a team of genetic genealogists built a family tree, eventually identifying a possible suspect in Sacramento County. Then detectives used traditional methods, surveillance, discarded items for confirmatory DNA and confirmed a match. The case that had been cold for decades had finally been unmasked. On April 24, 2018, authorities arrested a 72-year-old man living quietly in a Sacramento suburb. The man, Joseph DeAngelo, had once been a police officer. The arrest sent a shockwave through the communities still haunted by the crimes. Following the arrest, prosecutors pursued charges related to murders and kidnappings and tied DeAngelo to a long list of accusations connected to rapes and burglaries. The evidence included DNA links to multiple scenes and corroborating investigative work that spanned years. In 2020, DeAngelo entered a plea to counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping, among other charges, admitting his guilt in multiple cases in order to avoid the death penalty. At a highly emotional sentencing hearing, victims and surviving family members confronted their attacker and recounted the damage left in his wake. In August 2020, DeAngelo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For many, the sentence was justice at last. A recognition of decades of pain, though it could not return what had been stolen because of statutes of limitations. Some of the sexual offense charges could not be prosecuted, but the plea and sentencing gave many families formal acknowledgement. The man who had terrorized their lives had been identified, had taken responsibility in the eyes of the court, and would never walk free again. The arrest and conviction closed a painful chapter for many. For survivors and families, the legal outcome brought a complex mixture of relief, sorrow, and the rawness of remembering. Decades of waiting had taught some to live with the unknown and rest or wrote what they had accepted as fate and reopened wounds that had slowly scarred. The use of consumer DNA databases to catch violent criminals sparked debates about privacy, consent, and the balance between public safety and individual rights. Lawmakers, ethicists, and the public grappled with questions that had no easy answers. How should genetic information be used? When does the search for justice cross a privacy line? The Golden State Killer case, the unmasking of Joseph DeAngelo, sits at the center of that debate. Practically, the case changed how cold cases are investigated. Genetic genealogy became an accepted tool for law enforcement under specific guidelines. Investigative units were formed, procedures updated, and a new pipeline emerged for revisiting long-dormant files with modern science. But the most important aftermath is human. Victims had to tell their stories again in open court. Communities had to remember and rebuild. Some survivors found solace in the conviction. Others were left with the complicated truth that justice could be both necessary and insufficient. The story of the East Area Rapist is not just about forensic breakthroughs or procedural triumphs. It is about the lives that were changed irreparably by a man who hid his crimes behind ordinary facadas. It is about families who learn how to live with fear and survivors' guilt. It is about the small acts of persistence by detectives, by victims, by writers and citizen sleuths that kept the truth alive for decades. The technology that caught him also forced a hard discussion about who we are and how we protect one another. The law can sentence a man. It cannot fully heal a community, but it can name what happened, hold someone accountable, and, if only partially, restore a sense of order where there was chaos. Decades after the first window was forced and the first life was stolen, the East Area Rapist was unmasked. The reign of terror ended not with a single dramatic moment in the night, but with patient science, persistent remembrance, and a community finally able to say, "We remember you. And we will not forget." Their pain will remain. Their voices are now heard. And for many, that matters.